Associate Director at Boogertman+Partners Architects, this office. Free time, I do a lot of things, but sketching is one of them.
Sketching.
Thank you.
Why don't you give us something outside the realm of design?
I chase the kids, I ride motorbikes, I fix the car, I fix broken things in the house. It's a lot, yeah.
Okay. Nice.
Okay.
Yes, Cliff?
Hello, my name is Cliff Gous. I'm also an Associate Director at Boogertman+Partners from the Pretoria office. And yes, I like design, I like sketching, I also like hunting, drinking, a lot of there's a lot of things, but yes, keep myself entertained.
Good, good.
My name is Acheng Aringo. I work for Elegant Fittings, but I'm a structural and design engineer by profession. I love networking and growing my value through meeting people, and that's why I ended up here today.
Nice,
Yeah.
nice.
My name is Jaime Velasco. I work as an architect at Urco Sanchez Architects. And in my free time, I like going to the cinema.
Hi everyone, my name is Ivy Onami. I work as a graduate architect at Buildex Studio, but I also used to work at Boogertman+Partners. During my free time, I still do things that are related to design because it's my lifestyle. Pottery, paint, drink wine.
My name is Gurmukh Panessa. I'm founder and principal architect at Grasp Design. I'm a board member at KGBS, and my free time I enjoy gym, a bit of gaming, building stuff like 3D printers, mix of stuff. So
there you have it. We have quite an interesting group of panelists up here. So what we'll do in this panel is we'll just have an honest conversation about over here, the current architectural landscape. What are the hits and misses? What match with our contexts? And when I say our context, we're looking at the region of Africa, and we'll zero in and look at what's happening in Nairobi, and we can comment on that. So what I'll do is I'll put up some images, and the panelists would start and comment, is this a hit or a miss? And we can go from there. And also, I would encourage the rest of you guys to also chip in. One panelist could say it's a miss, but you know something about this building that makes it contextual, and we urge you just tell us, because we'll figure out what is contextual as we move along. Yeah.
So maybe to engage the crowd a little bit some more. When you put up the image, before anybody speaks in the panel, I want you to see whether it's a hit or a miss. So you come up with a sign that says hit or miss, because I want the crowd to get engaged.
Okay. Perhaps we can't do this or that because it will become a bit a touchy subject. So I can't do left or right because I'm left-handed. I don't see hands. So
if it's a hit, we'll go that way.
They go that way.
Okay, that's a hit side.
That's a hit side. Miss side.
Right?
Okay.
Remember, right is
Right.
hit. Miss is a
Okay. So Leon is a hit, and what is a miss?
Yeah, you got it right.
Okay.
The miss in the house.
All right. Oh, swipe left. I see. Okay.
So they'll always swipe left.
All right. Okay. Great. So first of all, before we start with what buildings we have ready for you, here is our question. It's taking a while. Yes. So these are questions to the panelists, so that they can quickly tell us in less than 5 minutes how you define a hit or a miss. And we'll start with Opio. How would you define a hit and a miss?
Yeah, thanks. I think it's mostly context and how it fits and what's defined it. So mostly context, yes.
Okay.
Yes, firstly context, secondly for me spatiality, not only inside but also exterior of building, spaces between buildings, not only internal space but external space as well.
Sustainability, and does it make sense to the person who's living there and how they're experiencing the space and the design?
I think I would say, does it do the most with the least amount of resources? That would be my answer.
Yeah, everything everyone has said, and maybe materiality, if it's contextual to the site and how it was used.
Practicality for the context and efficiency in material use and technology use.
All right, so I'll just start with the first slide. You guys, okay, let's do trisex. Okay, so is it a hit?
All right, let's see. 1, 2, 3.
Can you all see? So half the room is pointing that direction. Is everyone participating? Oh, it's a hit. Ah, okay, great. Do you mind telling us why you think it's a hit? I think we'll start with the panelists. Oh, some context. Sorry. Oh, you're not able to see. So I'll just be moving the screen around for everyone, I guess. So, starting from Opio.
You want to say what building that is first? Or
it's already written.
Oh, sorry.
It's already written. Sorry, it's the Dominican Chapel in Nigeria. Yes. So, come again. They're all one building, just different sides of it, so that you can get a bit of more context. Yeah. So we could start from Opilo over there. Just help us figure out, why do you think this is a hit, or you don't think it's a hit?
In terms of, I can see a lot of ornament in it. I can see deliberate attempt to, lack of a better word, Africanize it. Probably there's some cultural significance to the facade. So I won't say there's a hit or a miss. I'll just say it looks like a good attempt.
Yeah, for me it's very interesting. I think what I like about it and what more leans it over to the hit side is the use of iconography. I can see the building facade creates something very iconic in the sense that it might have religious connotations to it. What I also think what will make this building extremely nice is spatiality inside, that you have indirect filtered light that is directly related to the iconography. It's an old Christian type of way of buildings, of building religious buildings. That in that sense, I would then say it leans again more to the Western side, because I think there's a lot of borrowed principles from the Romanesque type, Gothic type architecture. So I'm not sure how African it is. So for me, it would lie in the middle.
Can I say hit? Because I think in Africa, religion is it's based out of fear. What if I don't get, and immediately looking at this, I was immediately scared. I feel dark, no. I feel dark spaces enveloping. There's a lack of understanding. It seems outside my realm of understanding. So I think there's a fear that has been evoked, which means I lean towards being able to go into this building to look for answers, and I'm desperate to tone that. I think that it's a hit because of that.
I do think it's a hit as well. I think there's a lot of information that we can't see from, I guess, these images, but it's a very complex project, in 3 ways for me. First of all, symbolism, the use of all of these Yoruba symbols. Even inside the chapel, there's a lot of symbolism, with the altar looking like a tree. I wish we had some interior photos. The choice of 12 pillars symbolizing also tribal the disciples, but also tribal craftsmanship from tribes of Yoruba. From an environmental perspective, those water features help cool down the space. They were meant to collect rainwater, cool down the space. The altar works almost like air chimney as well. On top of that, there were meant to be fish that ate the mosquito larvae. So it's a very self-conscious design from an environmental perspective. And lastly, from a construction or buildability point of view, it's a project that uses a lot of local materials. We can't see in that image, but it's very honest, almost super affordable materials like concrete, mabati, timber, even like some sort of laterite mixed with concrete that this architect invented. So it's a big hit for me. I wish we could see a bit more images and floor plans of the project, but it's a very interesting project in my opinion.
I'm gonna say Jaime really sold this, but for me, I would say 50-50. The two images, the one at the bottom and the one on the right, that's definitely a hit. It kind of reminds me of just how, as Africans, we create homestays, and with religion, how religion was spread throughout the continent, it's kind of referring to that idea of home and how people enter through the space. However, when I look at the top, I really don't understand what's going on. It feels like mimicky in a way, and doesn't really tie into the context as this building. So I can't see how both of them work together. So yeah, I would say 50-50.
Okay, I'd have to agree with that as well. It is 50-50. I believe the patterning does tie in with the general shape. You've got the circular themes basically coming through. However, if you look at the building, it looks quite derelict. Those fish probably are dead. So I'm sure it's mosquito laden. But yeah, I think from a maintenance point of view, traditional vernacular architecture was low or very minimal maintenance. It was very practical, and only features like the cooling aspect, yes, but by virtue of it being well positioned or oriented, it would cool itself. You don't really have to have a separate. And some of these, it looks a bit gimmicky, especially the top left image.
Okay. Yeah. All right. From the audience, do we have anyone that thinks it was a miss? Maybe the devil's advocate here. No one. No one thinks it was a miss. No one at all. Okay. Oh, yeah. Johan, you think it was a miss?
Can I just ask it differently? Is it a beautiful building? How would you define it in one word?
Looks functional.
Okay.
I believe in the first impression when you visit a place. So the kind of impression this building gives me is nah. So however, respect that the culture, maybe they were following the culture and stuff and were trying to retain everything in it, but I still feel they could have done better in terms of the first impression and what they sell as a building. Could have been more attractive. As she said, she doesn't understand what is going on up there. I also don't understand. And then I feel like it's more of a negative culture. Like the way Africans are so religious. Don't you think that thing looks like a... You get it? I mean, true religions. I don't think they're going to attend such a church.
Sorry, maybe if you allow me to clarify, the image on the top left, it's a different building in the same campus. So it's not actually the same building by the same architect, but that's part of the campus, which relates to what you were saying about the African sort of like homestead, in the sense that the chapel is protected by the rest of the buildings, but it's a different building.
Leon, sorry, if I wanted to just comment on this as well, sorry. Yeah, so just, I mean, look, traditional African architecture was very practical. It served the purpose that it was meant for, right? When you're looking at this as a space which is supposed to inspire, it's a place of worship, it's supposed to inspire, it does not inspire.
Let me comment. The way I see it, first image, I think it was an attempt to have light as a beacon of hope, if I may say that. It's dark, I mean, a source of light. Light is symbolic of hope, enlightenment. So I think that was the attempt on the first one, the first image. I think that's my way of seeing it.
Okay.
I wanted to say there was a comment that it wasn't beautiful. I disagree. I think when you think about vernacular architecture or just African architecture, it's based on craft and detailing. And how the chapel looks like, I think it was beautifully crafted. And with churches and chapels, you don't really get inspired by the outside. It's when you get in and start to play with lights, because we want to give you the God feeling. Yeah. So it's supposed to be a journey. So first impressions, it's probably not like, yeah, I want to get in there, but then maybe if we saw the interiors on the plan, we could be surprised. So.
Okay. We move to the next one. Okay.
But it's probably very beautiful inside.
Yeah.
Based
Yeah.
on, yeah.
Yeah, it would be the same as. So, oops. There we go. So this one is very obvious. Very many people know about it. So, show of hands, hit or miss. Hit. Guys, let's do the Mexican wave. You're doing the Mexican wave. So hit or miss. Hit. So everyone is saying it's a hit. Do we have no one who's a devil's advocate here? Okay. Okay, yeah. But we'll get to you. Let's first hear what the panelists have to say about it. Oh, sorry.
I think you don't always mention what the building is. You're assuming that we all know.
Oh, sorry. No. This is the Lions Startup Campus in Turkana, designed by Francis Gale.
Yeah, I think for me, it's a very obvious hit. What I do like about it is twofold. Is number one, if you look at the right-hand photo and you look at the complexity and the color of the earth and the context where it's in, I think it does reflect quite sensitively through the use of local scratch plaster, etc. With the coloring and the pigmentation, it does reflect the mountain that it comes out of quite nicely. Second thing that I also think makes it very successful and vernacular in a sense is if you look at the top left and you look at, it's a free standalone building that basically becomes an object or a folly in context, and it does not overpower the landscape. If you look at the trees where it's surrounded in, it does not necessarily go exceptionally higher than that. So from a morphological massing type study, I would say it's also very sensitive contextually. I can also see with the window sizes and the openings, I think it would be a lovely naturally ventilated building, and yes, it's a very clear hit for me.
I don't have anything really clever to say, but I think what it looks like is when it rains and the ants start building. You've seen that before. Yeah, so I think, especially when you look at the top left image, I think he naturally mimics the environment, the play on do, and I think that could be a beautiful way on commenting on what vernacular African texture would be. Yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree with your comment, actually, and I think that was on purpose, actually, the mimicking of the termite mound, no? And to me, this building, it's also a hit. It poses a really interesting question, which is like, what are we drawing inspiration when it comes to the current vernacular, now what we think of vernacular, and perhaps as the world becomes more like a globalized place where the cultures are more and more similar, perhaps the landscape, perhaps the climate context is going to be more the sort of like that source of inspiration rather than necessarily social or symbols that have to do more with culture or religion. So yeah, it's really interesting in that regard, I think.
I also agree, it's a hit. It's very contextual to the site, also responds climatically to the site. And it being in Turkana, people build based on necessity, and it being a school also, just like the program itself, is like a necessity to the area. So I think that's also something about vernacular architecture. Sometimes it doesn't have to be the building. It's maybe what are you introducing to a site that's needed by the people?
Okay, I definitely think it's a hit, but I'm going to put something out controversial. I believe the site has 50% to do for it, because how would you scale this up for in the urban environment? Let's say you're doing a high rise in a higher density area, perhaps. So it's a fantastic building, works very well, very contextual, mimics. It's a pastiche of past vernacular architecture, African architecture. Beautiful building. Put in different context, how would it work there? So yes, it works here. The conditions are prime for it, right? So the question is, how do we now translate it for the next photos now you're going to present? Yeah.
She said she thought it was a miss, and I would like to know what that's about. Okay, you have a mic here.
Okay, so where to start? First of all, if you ask me, the shape is very unnatural. I mean, the landscape is rough and the shape of the building is very straight. In that, when you look at it, I mean, the only thing that makes it blend really well with the landscape, if you ask me, is the color. Otherwise, like she said, it looks like an anthill or something of the sort. But then anthills are not essentially shaped like this, you know? So if you ask me, it's a miss in that first, whoever built it feels like they just did the color to, you know, just make it blend into the environment. But in real sense, the geometry of the structure itself does not blend with the environment. I mean, if you look at the rocks and then you look at the structure, there's a very, very sharp shift in shape. Your eye goes from looking at, you know, rough edges of a circle to straight lines. And I think that's something we need to consider. And then considering where it's built, I think Turkana, then if you're talking about vernacular, I don't feel any relation to Turkana culture, because in essence, the architecture was nothing close to this, actually, you know? Apart from the sort of attempt to get close to the Oka, there isn't quite much that feels bonding to the Turkana people or to the landscape. It just feels like the architect got smart with the color, you know? But everything else was just, you know, shape, light. And I think, you know, it's important for vernacular architecture to speak into the landscape, you know, to blend into the landscape. I'm seeing a rock, and you look at the building, and you look at the rock, and there's sort of, you know, a relation. Maintain the shapes, the, you know, the edges, the roughness, the whatnot. So for me, I feel like it's a miss. It feels like a building you could put anywhere else, Egypt, Cairo, and it would fit, you know? I mean, there's nothing so special about it being on this landscape. Nothing makes it wow, like, okay, this and the land feels like one essentially seamless piece.
All right. Okay, let's hit the next building now.
Beyond, it would be interesting to understand why Francis Kere got that award. Because she's just totally.
I think we'll discuss that later, because there are many more principles to this building that make it contextual.
No, that's okay.
Yeah. So, come on. There we go. Technology. There we go. So this is the Wangari Maathai House in Nairobi. It was a proposal that the Boogertman+Partners studio put together. And so just give us your thoughts. Hit or miss? Quickly. Okay, guys, let's be honest. Let's hit or miss. You all need to participate. You only 3 people who are saying hit. The poor are consistent. Okay. All right. I think we should start again with Opil. Oh, he hasn't seen. It's to the building also. I'll start with Gurmukh. Yes.
Okay, so I feel this is a miss. Sorry, Andrew. And reason being, you could place this anywhere in the world and it would fit in. It could be a forest in Scandinavia, right? What's the definitive item which contextualizes it in Kenya, and specifically for the Wangari Maathai Institute? I think it's an opportunity lost. It could have been a lot rooted in the actual construction. A lot of timber perhaps could have been used for instead of for the construction. The shape, especially the The central courtyard reminds me a bit of Tadao Ando's work. So the thing is, what has been done to really root it in what Wangari Maathai was teaching, number one, and number two, to incorporate Kenyan culture and East African culture. I think your comments were very valid regarding the Turkana, integrating Turkana culture. Because if you look at it, vernacular African architecture was, as I said, very practical, very efficient. And the ornamentation that was came on board is something that we can borrow and add as a pastiche basically onto the current architecture. But that is a missed opportunity on this project, I believe.
Good book, I know where you sit.
I would say it's a miss. However, I do think it is contextual to the site. The whole idea with Wangari Maathai was to save the trees, and it sits lightly on the site and it doesn't impact the trees around it. I do like the courtyard feel because it gives it like a gathering space. However, yeah, the choice of material could have contextualized it a bit more, use of timber or something else, to just go with the lightness of, yeah, what it's trying to show.
Welcome back to
I think it's very tough to judge, to be honest, based with such little information. I wish I knew more about the project, but I'm going to lean more towards the no, perhaps, just for the sake. It's true that from the images, I could see this building in many places. But maybe again, I'm deviating from the topic, but it brings me like what is necessarily vernacular, like what we think of vernacular nowadays. Perhaps 10 years down the line, we perceive vernacular as some of the buildings we were saying before. Someone was talking about Gothic Kikuyu, perhaps Gothic Kikuyu is vernacular architecture in 50 years. Most of the times vernacular architecture doesn't have an architect. So anyway, I'm deviating too much. I'd like to know more if perhaps there's any inspiration on perhaps Agikuyu's settlements that maybe, or the way they grow, that inspired those rounded shapes. But yeah, I'm going to lean more towards the no, and I agree a lot with what Ivy was saying, by the way.
Let me try. There's a joke about the KICC building. And there's a story that's not too well known about Wangari Maathai. Initially, Mr. Maathai's name was Mathai. And after the divorce, because she had built so much behind her name, she didn't want to lose the name. So she actually went to court to fight the name. And the judge gave her the double A in Maathai. Throughout this composition, from what I can tell, there's that play on that double, which I think to the personality, I don't know whether you did that level of research, but I think to the personality, it plays to that. So it's 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. Yeah.
7 times.
So I was in Berlin when one of our Pretoria directors, Bob van Bebbe, presented this, and there was there was actually a very unique panel. One of the guys was from Coop Himmelblau's office, which posed a very interesting question. But just to clarify, I think it is a hit, and I'll briefly explain why. So first of all, I think it's number one in the shape. I think the shape resembles continuity in learning and continuity in experience. And if you talk about efficiency and continuity, the most efficient form is a circle. The other reference that it also has is not the reference by not touching the trees, but also the symbolic line of the tree rings, and it's actually growing in a sense. So that was another conceptual driver. I think also by referencing or bringing it back to the African hut, which is a circular typology, which has a single entrance for safety and security. And this is exactly what this project also do. Like Johan said this morning, no lion is entering this circle. So in terms of that, I think it does create exceptional internalized hermetic space for reflection and for commemoration, because this is what it is. So in that forms, it's a success for me. The one question that was posed by Coop Himmelblau's office is why is the project hermetic in a sense? why does it cut off the exterior? Why is it a concrete solid facade? And that was the exact answer, that it resembles this whole idea of internalization and commemoration, and resembles the idea of the African hut.
So again, I'll just ask, does the building make you go, why? Or do you just say no? So there is symbolism. Does the building make you curious and ask why these guys did this, so that it leads you to ask the questions, do the research, hear the story behind what inspired it? If it doesn't make you go why, then it's purely the artist or the architect who knows the thing, and it's, what Frangeri does all the time. I like it, that's it. Don't ask me what inspired me, that's it. Like it, hate it, leave it alone. So if the building makes you go why, I think it's a hit. Does it make you go why? Do you ask why a circle and not a square? Why is it floating? Why concrete? If it makes you ask the question and the answers are there, I think it's a hit. So I don't know whether it makes you ask, but I think you already are curious on what the story behind it. So I think it's a hit because it makes you curious on what inspired it. So maybe it makes you go inside there and you find out what inspired it, what Wangari Maathai was all about. So in terms of its role, I think it's a hit. In terms of context, that's a different discussion. Yes.
Okay. Do you have anything from the audience? Nothing? You guys also panelists.
Just say it's Ivy.
I do have a question. So I like how you've explained why it's a hit, but why is it vernacular?
Yes, so as I said, are you defining vernacular by the purpose of the building or the context? Or you see, like, there are some buildings that would, let's say, traditionally, you had shrines and stuff like that, and they're symbolic. They're not necessarily very functional. I think the pyramid's a good example. So is it shaped so that the rain, goes on left and right, like the roof is, or there's no rain? Is it meant to be massive? You understand? Is this doing the same thing the pyramid does in terms of telling the story, so that it doesn't matter whether these guys are bringing the rocks from down the Nile? They didn't have those rocks there. They would have built using sand. So it's not necessarily saying it's in a forest, so use the trees. Wangari Maathai was about conserving the trees. Is the concrete being used because it's solid? So I think the fact that it's making you ask those questions, it's a hit. Yeah. Go ahead.
Sorry, you're like inspiring me more thoughts, and I think I'm actually now leaning more towards the yes. And my point is that sometimes we tend to, when we talk about vernacular, we tend to think it needs to mimic a shape or a certain material or look. So it brings us immediately back to a certain image that we have about a typology. But perhaps vernacular can also mean mimicking. How do we deal with a context? How do we approach a building from a symbolic point of view? Or how do we even mimic an experience, with more modern materials or more modern technologies? So I understand now, I guess, the feeling of for example, the feeling of central single entrance, or but as I said, I think I'd love to know more about the project. It is a beautiful project, but I just wanted to raise that, vernacular is not just, it looks like a traditional hut. Maybe it can also mimic technology, it can mimic efficiencies, it can mimic symbolism, hopefully with a more contemporary language.
I agree with all the comments. It's a nice looking building, no doubts about it. But the thing is, when you look at it, can it instantly tell you that this is a building in Africa? That's the thing. You see, and I think
if for instance, it was shaded brown, same building, just like getting, would that change your perspective?
No.
Okay. Nothing from the audience. Can we go to the next one?
I think it's interesting. There's a lot of discussion around
Get this going,
maybe a question that I will put to the panel is what defines an African building? What are the elements that you say this is an African building? Also, what are the characteristics of vernacular architecture? Because as you clearly said, it's not just the symbolic point of view. I thought these were the rings Wangari Maathai used to wear, and they look nice, and it quite works. But ideally, in my perspective, or in my view, there are three things that really defines vernacular architecture. There's the contextual forces. Does the building fit? The Kere architecture that we saw fits because of the contextual alignment of that building. The second one is the symbolic nature, the cultural aspect, the lifestyle of these communities around the buildings. Does it relate to these particular communities? And finally, it's the building technology that you incorporated in the project. Is it a traditional knowledge that you try to advance into, the normal building, and also the material aspect of it? So for me, vernacular architecture, if it hits those three aspects, then it qualifies. Otherwise, you may look at buildings as totems, you just put crosses, I saw crosses in a project. It's okay, but does it qualify? So, yeah.
I think just to, as a closing remark on this, and I like what I just want to pick up something that you talk about and something that we might be cautioned of just seeing these buildings as objects. And what you're saying is it's about the experience. And for me, that's very interesting and very important, because I do think that experiential quality is subjective. The fact that you saw that as possibly her jewelry or her rings, for me, creates an additional layer of interpretation where I think the architecture is successful. So, again, it is always about not thinking about what it just does climatically or contextually or socially, but experientially. That's actually what we're doing, is we're creating space.
Okay, so let's move on to the next one. Hit or miss? Quickly. So there are many who say it's a hit.
Yes.
Or miss? Anyone else?
Yes.
Okay, so we have majority are hits. But we'll start with you again. Why do you think it's a miss?
I'll go back what lady in the audience said. Basically, it's the shapes are very severe. Yeah, and yes, it's been painted a very bright yellow ochre, almost vermilion, well, to orange almost. The thing is, what else grounds it? What else makes it? It doesn't look like it fits well on the site. It looks like it's just been plonked on. I'm not too familiar with most of the information about the project. However, I can use this as a bit of an answer to what Pablo had said, basically. The answer to that is a very difficult one. And I believe that's why we're having this discourse. It's due to the effects of colonialization. African culture, most of the African cultures, which were traditionally nomadic, did not have a chance to naturally progress their architecture to the urban context to which it is now suited. So if you do find buildings which are, in the general opinion, more suitable or more closely tied to vernacular architecture, they're the standalone buildings in a remote area, which are a lot of publicizing a lot. So, but the fact is, how do you turn that into another urban context? You see, how do you? And I think it comes down to some of the basics. Break it down. If you explode the original, a hut was not unique to Kenya. Neither was it to Africa, right? Many civilizations used the circular form because it's easy to build. Yeah. So what does make East African culture unique? What makes West African culture unique? It's the cultures, and that's, it's the patterning. It's how they used to live. Their weaving techniques. That is what I believe can be utilized and explored as inspiration to ground this architecture culturally to the specific context, over and above these basics. Getting orientation right, making good use of locally sourced materials. It's a comfortable building from a thermal point of view, good lighting, good ventilation. Unfortunately, a lot of buildings now we don't achieve that. So that for me is a critical. You've got the white aluminium windows over there, which are showing through. You've got these nice little niches, but those ones are showing through, and I can say, okay, fine. There's a bit of lack of consistency. Fine, it might be in the middle of a desert, but and they've got these. Maybe they haven't grown up yet, but it looks very barren. It does look like it's just been plonked on. Doesn't look like it's part of the site.
So I would like more photos and more information about the project. First impression, I guess it's functional. It is a university. But when I looked at it and I thought about Startup Lions by Francis Carey, I was thinking both of those spaces or places look like they're in a desert. And if you think about the communities that are or live in deserts, their shelter is very easy to fold up and carry. So it's very transient. And this is very permanent. So I guess how do you design for a place of temporary nest? Like if you're doing education, how do you still contextualize it to the people who are there? Because these are buildings that need to be functional and I guess severe because a lot of people will be using them. But yeah, in terms of vernacular architecture, I don't know. I don't know much about Moroccan culture to even, yeah.
It's a tough question, but I think it brings in more questions than it really answers. But as a whole, I would say yes, probably it is. It fits the context. It makes me think if this building was in Spain, where I come from, like, would we be saying, is this vernacular Spanish or is it vernacular? Like, is that a question that we need to ask about necessarily African architecture? And coming back to your, what is African architecture? To me, there's not really the easiest answer, and maybe the most accurate, is like architecture made by Africans. Stop. Then where the influence is, where the inspiration comes from, we can discuss the roots of that. No, is it colonization? Is it inspiration? Is it globalized, context? Why should African buildings be inspired by forms from the past or from? Why can't African architecture aspire to a universal abstraction? No, for example, as Europe or the West did. So I'd like to defend this building. Like, maybe we don't have to necessarily always look in shape, and that's African. Yeah, I'll leave it there.
Let me try. So I grew up on Brookside Drive. 22 Brookside Drive. Don't come and visit. And my dad is a Luo elder leader in this country. And when he got money, he asked for a Scandinavian architect to build us a house. From that Luo context, we live in the traditional setting for a Luo. It's the number of sons that you have, and then one big house. So if you ever have a chance to look at the Google image of our house, it's 5 huts, into one house. But it's an interpretation from a Scandinavian guy, interpreting it for us as Africans into this house. So it's a 3-level house, 17 bedrooms. It's ridiculous. But I can see he achieved the look, the shape. But what you've mentioned, it's dark. There, when you turn the staircase, it's a spiral staircase, but it becomes dark because of that whole entire one-way entry. And to that, I'm asking again, what makes you African exactly? I don't speak the language, to be honest. I dress like this. I couldn't even be bothered to put on kente. What is African? What is our vernacular context? As an engineer, when I look at this, I see it's a miss, because all that, I could have repurposed that money into shade covering. And, to shade covering, especially for desert cooling, and that would have been better use for it.
For me, this building is a massive yes. It's a massive hit. And the reason why is because the building, you should not look at this building in isolation. It's a complex building. It's made up of majority of, I think, 19 or 18 wings. This concept is based on the old principle of Moroccan urbanism, where it creates courtyards, and the courtyards are not only linked to climatic system, but it's also linked to a functional system of how it's used. So in essence, what this building does is it is actually a shading device. It shades different courtyards at different times in the day, that is linked to the university program. So, for instance, I think there's 9 separate courtyards, and it is, I think, a fantastic interpretation of a climatic symbol, and also the use of light in this building. It's actually very bad pictures of this building. I think there was another few that was phenomenal. And what also inspires me greatly in this building is Louis Kahn that used to say that he used light as a material in architecture. And this is what this building exactly does. It's heavily thermally massed. It's in Morocco, so climatically it works. And the light quality that this building's interior creates is beyond belief. So in terms of that, I think spatially the building is extremely successful. And again, what I said in the beginning, I don't only look inside, but also exterior-wise. What is the spaces between buildings? Remember, the outside of our buildings becomes the inside of the city. And that's where this building, for me, number one, 100% hit, ticks all the boxes of the whole of the concept of vernacular architecture. But I agree 100% that vernacular should not only be referenced to the past. Why can't this building be a reference for future context where they can look back and say, this was a good building that's vernacularly designed?
Yeah, I'd first say, okay, let me speak first and say whether it's a hit or miss. In terms of context, so this building maybe could sit in any desert, any arid context, maybe not the cold deserts, maybe the hot ones. But think about it. One of the godfathers of modernist architecture, Le Corbusier, was actually inspired by Mediterranean and Moroccan and Algerian architecture, which is weird because you're saying this guy went and told guys to build boxes, white boxes on steel, and was inspired by African architecture, which is the inverse of what we are discussing. So are we looking at African architecture or being African in isolation in an island? You know, there's cross-pollination between Spain, Italy, Africa, France, you know, there's all that influence, yeah, the Arabic, the Indian. So at which point do we say, look, this is our border, the minute you put windows on this building, glass windows, it's no longer African. But if it's a box like this, it's African, you understand? So I'd put it as a hit in terms of context and in terms of everything everybody has mentioned here. But I just throwing something else in there is, you can't say because this building can sit comfortably in Mexico, that means it's a failure in Africa. There's all that. Are we on a separate island? What the things influence us? If it's the environment, if it's the climate, it's the same one those guys had. Did they evolve from the same origins? You understand? So we have the same answer, but they started from a different checking point. Yeah.
Right. Just move on to the next one. Yeah. Yes. Good comment. Yes.
Yeah, I say it's a hit for this reason. I think color is subconsciously a very big factor in the African vernacular conversation. If I say took this building and took a photo of this building, I went to the street and asked random people, where do you think this building has been built? I say A, someplace in Europe, someplace say in Asia, someplace in Africa, and wherever, in the same color. I think I'm guessing, but I think they would be highly inclined to say it's probably somewhere in Africa. If I took the same building and just changed the color, for example, maybe it would yield different results. So I think subconsciously, even without knowing the program or knowing these other things about it, I think color is such a big thing, especially this particular color, brown color, and you'll see that even as you go along in the images we had as well in our first discussion. Anything that kind of comes with this color then kind of pushes itself to to that direction. It's not a smart way to look at it, but I think kind of it forces your mind to go there in some sort of way or form. So those are my thoughts here.
Yeah, I think, for me, when I looked at it initially, it reminded me a bit of Louis Barragan's work because of the colors. The thing is, I think we're basing this on the images you're giving. So it's first impressions based on these images. Some of the panelists may have more information on it, and hearing that makes me think, yeah, definitely, that's a lot more contextual. But what we're basing it is on what you're showing us, especially if we don't have any background for the building. So,
sorry, just to react to that. So, imagine you're in a new city. Do you think you should be given up, and you're told, okay, this is the context, or should we care more about the immediate visual? Yes, so that we consciously, is it functional? Is it cheap? So I think the face value actually matters, and it's a big factor in this. Yes.
I agree with what Opil says, but then I have to Gurmukh. I agree with what he says. We're looking at this image as in isolation. And if I'm in a new city, I'm on Google Maps, and I'm seeing how that building actually sits on the site. So I already have an idea of architecturally, like how is it relating with other buildings and how is it relating with the street. And then when I'm driving through it, I'm also seeing the neighboring stuff. So even before I understand what's happening inside, that relationship already is like, first impression. But with this image, it's isolated. So it looks like there's nothing happening. And I loved your description of the building, because then I was like, oh, that makes it contextual. That makes it functional. That makes it very necessary for the site. So it's a hit. But by looking at it, it's a miss. Yeah.
So I think this panel is a very interesting one. And I see you have so many more images. So I think to keep it short, I want you to engage the guys by just either you shout hit or miss. No more questions. Thanks, guys. Because our next panel, we're gonna have some cocktails. So I want to move to that. So why don't you do this? Huh? Yeah. So move to the next image. Pause it. I want to hear from the audience. Hit or miss? And remember, I'm the miss. He's a hit.
He's a hit.
So we'll see who's
Whoops,
louder.
where has it gone?
Okay, so let's go to the next image. All right. So is that a hit or a miss?
Miss.
All right. Is that a hit or a miss?
Miss.
Thank you.
Hit.
Hit.
He's saying because it's our parliament. Right. Is that a hit or a miss?
Hit.
All right. We won't ask why. You guys glorifying competition. All right, let's go.
let's go to the museum.
Oh, you want to go to the museum, huh? This one you want to see. So this is a new museum in Huru Gardens. Hit or miss?
Miss.
Yeah?
Miss.
Miss. Miss.
Miss.
Both. It's a little bit of both.
There's too much. There's too much.
All right. Okay. Let's go to the next one.
Hit.
Sacred Heart Church. Kericho, sorry. It's taking a while.
I'm not even here.
There you go.
Hit.
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 Hit. Oh, sorry.
Hit.
Okay.
Hit.
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 This is South African Embassy in Ethiopia. There's a miss somewhere there.
It looks South African.
It's
Hit.
mixed reactions. Hit. Everybody thinks a hit? Miss. Okay. Oops, sorry.
Parliament. Which one is that?
Hey, so build.
Miss. Miss.
Hey guys, like you're waiting for it. Okay, you enter.
Miss.
Why do I feel like Musau students are in this class? They didn't like Musau too much. Yeah. And that marks the end of this presentation. I think what I'm picking up from you guys is a lot about context and also about, oh, you have something to say, Mark?
I think for me, I'm going to play like devil's advocate or throw a cat amongst the pigeons, as Johan says. Do you think, and I'll pose it to the panel and also to the audience, do you think we give so much emphasis on visual architecture or magazine sort of architecture? We can look at these images and say, it's a hit or a miss without having really experienced the buildings, that we sort of almost forget that, we have other senses, yeah? We have 4 other senses, yeah? So do you think that, you can experience this building in terms of light, shadow, massing inside it, how it even smells. Do you think we give so much emphasis on oculocentrism in this sort of architecture that we almost, you can almost say that you've watched a good movie by just seeing the trailer? So, and what role do you think that sensorial or that multifaceted sensory architecture has relative to vernacular architecture? Because if you go to a Masai Manyata, the experience of a Masai Manyata is the smell, yeah, because of the cow dung, yeah. It's not really how it looks. So, what would you?
So, if I may, that's a very interesting question, and I think a good example would be Kunstmuseum in Cologne. And this was done by Peter Zumthor. A very interesting building. The outside is quite plain. It's got the fenestration similar to the market in Ethiopia, which you saw earlier. But the experiential space inside is fantastic, right? So I don't think it's just the visual, the aesthetic of the building. I've been to UN Towers. I can tell you, inside or out, it's a miss. So, yeah.
There's a question there, and then we get some closing comments, and then we get ready for the next one.
I think mine is more of a closing comment. Okay. Yeah, I think from what has come out in this discussion is our question. My first question is, why would you want to make Africa brown? Just because a building is brown, it fits in Africa, and just because a building is green, doesn't fit in Africa. I am very, very disappointed that you said the Wangari Maathai building is not beautiful because it doesn't look African. What is our definition of the African culture in terms of colors? And us limiting ourselves to just one color to represent Africa is like, why can't we have any form of building, any form of color to represent the African culture? There's so many other things that we can represent the African culture with, and still we are hit in our buildings.
Good closing comment. Was that a comment or a question?
I don't know.
Kibura raised a question about colors. You can find him on the sidebar there and extend the discussion. But that's a good question. Any other closing comments or questions?
Okay, I'll start with, someone said something about, do we just judge architecture from what we see, which is what we've been doing. And I'd like to pull up, I think a quote, I don't remember quite who it's by, but he says, architecture makes space pass, okay? So, of course, there's way more to architecture than what we see, but as human beings, we're very visual, so we need to think about what our intent is with the look, you know? And also just moving away from that, I think when we speak vernacular, we should think of identity. We don't have to pick a certain color, a certain pattern, a certain mode, but I think as we're designing buildings, we need to think about identity. I feel like, if I may, currently we are sort of living in what seems like a brick game, like we're Super Mario in Tetris, you know? Because everything sort of follows the same form. You don't exactly catch the sense of identity in everything. I think if you ask me, a lot of those buildings were misses because they lacked a piece of identity. Everything looks like lines and movement and lines and movement. And I'm African, and the thing that lacks from Africanness a lot especially is line and movement. I mean, us ourselves, we're curvy, we're women, our country, everything. You would rarely catch, you know, sense of straight lines and straight movement and all that. But then you rarely see it in architecture. And it's not very easy to solve because, again, I think we're living in a world where we have such a sense of direction towards minimalism that it's beginning to be seen in our architecture. You know, we want less and less and less. But at what point is that less sacrificing, you know, our sense of identity, which is what I think we need to sit down and think of when we're speaking vernacular architecture. So, you know, I think my challenge to everyone in this audience is I think we're all somehow in the industry, you know? So every time we're designing, can we move away from this sense of modernism? Because I feel like all our architecture, we are aiming for grand things, we are forgetting the identity. Everyone wants to design a building that's big with good shadow play and, you know, drastic lighting or magnificent lighting. We're forgetting what is it about a building that, you know, makes it feel like, okay, I'm in Lamu. What makes you feel like you're in Lamu? Like if I asked you about the university in Morocco, what makes it feel Moroccan? I don't think anyone would have a good answer to that, apart from maybe the color, you know. So when we're thinking vernacular, I think we should think in a broad spectrum, yeah? So I guess, I think I just have a problem with and the brick game and everything feels so bricky, you know? You don't find so much character. I mean, I love Asian architecture because there's so much character. The shape, and they put in thought into, you know, their materials and a lot of straight movement. And I think our architecture has too much Western influence. So vernacular identity. What's your identity? What's our identity of the building you're designing? What's the identity of the interior you're designing? Yeah.
Thank you. I was thinking the same thing. So with that closing statement, I would like. I
think let's get one of the people in the panel.
Yeah.
Cliff will do it, and after that we can.
Andrew, thank you very much. And first of all, I want to congratulate everyone. I think this has been a fantastic session, where everyone takes part and really put the minds on the table. But for me, I'm a designer as well, so I would like to take a step back and that just to get a little bit of more insight on the problem that I'm working with. But African cities and African urbanism and the way Africa has always built cities is very unique. There's been a fantastic, and we spoke about it at API quite recently, there's been a fantastic book written by Keaton and Ulrich on the books in city. It was written in 2020. And what they say there is that Africa is an anomaly. Africa don't operate in a white or black. Africa is one large big grey. It's always done things differently. And the reason for that is Africa has always, it's a consumer industry. So Africa always used something and then take something new, use it up, new, and they've done exactly the same thing with cities. Do you know in between the first African country that gained independence in 1957 and 2020, 14 new cities, and 2022, and 4 of those cities has been built. And that is an exceptional statistic. So if you look at Tema, a major new African port city east of Accra, was built in 1960, right? 3 years after Ghana gained independence. 1965, Lilongwe was built. Cities. Mitchell's Plain in South Africa, 1970. Waterfall City. In a lot of the African countries look overseas for inspiration. For instance, to Saudi, to Dubai, to all those places, bring in external consultants, and that's where I think you made a fantastic point where I want to close on. Bring all these external consultants in and try and enforce these Western ideas and way of city building on African cities. So maybe the answer is architecture is African architecture, like you said. Oh yeah.
Cliff, thanks for wrapping up that session. I think there might be a lot of other discussions on the side following this discussion. Interesting. We could have shown a lot of other images, videos of other buildings, talked about experiences being in those buildings. We'll save that for another session. And I think the louder session will be after a few guests have a few cocktails. So a little bit of housekeeping. One, I know, Leon, you want to give some gifts to the panelists who we called up. But I think after the panel, there'll be clips that are done, just takeaways. So please don't, panelists. And then number 2, we'll be moving on to a next session in the next 10 minutes. So get your bathroom break. Make sure you come back with a cocktail in hand, because the next session is about Boogertman at 10, Boogertman at 40. It's a celebration. So looking forward to that one. So 10-minute break.